morning and out to school.
Parking at MUN has been a bone of contention for many years. It is because of this that a parking culture has formed here on campus. To get all sides of the story, we interviewed 5 people with varying parking situations. These are their stories.
About 15 years ago, Monsu were asked to try to help out with solving the problem of parking here on campus for students. There was a lot of issues with students, I guess, trying to get permits. They were lining up for days in the tunnels, so they decided to come up with an online lottery draw. Basically what it is, anybody with 48 credits and that were registered for the next semester were able to enter into a draw. The date of the draw, at 12 midday, the successful applicants would be notified and they would be given a lot that they could park in. And the random draw would indicate which lot it was. Nobody had any dealings in it. It would come from the computer itself. Parking permits range from $12 for students per semester. Staff pay anywhere from $40 upwards to $270, and that's for a year. The border regions are the determining factor on the cost factor. There's a revenue account with facilities management, and all the money that is taken, the revenue coming in from the tickets and fines and parking permits goes into a pool. It goes towards lighting, painting of the lines for the parking lots, pavement, any upgrades to the road to make the road safe. All lots do require permits. We have 45 permitted lots. We have approximately 27 areas that are pay and display or meters. We have a little over, almost 3,000 permitted lots and just over 800 meter and pay and display lots on campus. So you're looking at about 3,700 spaces, a little over 3,700 spaces. The new science course is going to be going up on 1616A. Right now the university here is looking at different areas on campus that we can build additional lots to compensate for the loss of spaces that we're going to have over there. Unfortunately, parking is what it is, and you know, if we weren't out there issuing tickets, people would not have places to park. It's part of our job, and it's one of our many daily activities. All university vehicles are encouraged to utilize loading zones. There are certain circumstances when it warrants that the vehicle may need to park on a roadway or somewhere to facilitate the work that they are doing. For example, I guess at CEP, we're responding to an emergency call. Yes, we may have to pull in on the sidewalk. We may have to pull out on the roadway, block off traffic or whatever. Same thing with university vehicles. I mean, obviously, if they're doing a certain project on campus, they may have to utilize certain areas of campus outside of a normal parking area.
I don't drive every day. I have class every day, but sometimes I do get dropped off, so I drive probably 2 days a week. I don't drive every day because it's impossible to get a spot. My permit is useful if I can get here before 8:30 in the morning. If I can get here early enough, it's great. But if not, I'll just park over in the pay and display across from the UC. I don't know how much my permit costs because it was actually given to me by a friend who didn't need it anymore. Permit spot is about 5 minutes walk away from my class, so it's not too bad. In bad weather, it kind of sucks, but it's okay. I've heard of people who have like templates for parking permits and just wait for the color each semester, and then they'll print it off and stick it in their car. I've heard of people doctoring the pay and display sheets, so they change the date or just buy one for a whole week and hope it works.
I've been driving to MUN for the last 2 years, but I've only had my own parking permit for one. A permit costs, I think it's $12 or $13 a semester, but I paid for fall, winter, and summer semester, and I think it was just under $50. Before I got a permit, my brother worked at the Ac Arena, so he had a staff parking spot, and I used to park there. My permit's pretty useful. I have a spot to park every day. It's far away from school, but it's a place to park. Sometimes I'm not allowed to park here if there's a funeral going on at the church. And that only makes sense that the priority should go to the actual owner of the parking lot. We're not informed in any way that we won't be able to park here, so I had to find somewhere else in the general vicinity to park and then get to class. In the morning when I get to school, I have to walk between 5 and 10 minutes to get to my first class from my parking spot. And in the winter it's pretty cold, and after a snowstorm you can't cross the field in between the parking lot and the Ac Arena, so you had to go down and take Elizabeth Avenue, which adds an extra almost 5 minutes onto the walk. I've Managed to talk my way out of my own parking ticket. There was a funeral going on when I came, and the campus enforcement told me to park in the other church parking lot next to the Ac Arena. They said I wouldn't be ticketed and I wouldn't have to put money in the meters as long as I put my parking pass in my windshield. So I did, and when I came out 2 or 3 hours later, I had been given a parking ticket during the time of the funeral. So I had to go back to campus enforcement and ask them, why did I get a ticket if I did exactly what they told me to. I had to wait for another week to come back and then talk to him, and we had a little discussion, and he was unaware that there was a funeral going on, so he just took back the ticket. The only ticket I've ever been given here was the one that they took back. Any other time I've come here, there's always been a spot to park. Like now it's like almost 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and there's a number of empty spots here. So like it's never an issue to find somewhere to park here, as long as the parking lot is open. Back when my parents went to university 30 years ago, parking was an issue then, and since they've taken out spots and they have and there's far more students attending MUN, so there's lots of open parking lots, and I kind of wonder why they don't put parking garages there with several stories. I just know like that certain hours of the day you won't get tickets in certain spots. I used to come when my girlfriend was living in residence. I used to drive to and park in res parking lot during certain hours of the day because I knew that I wouldn't get a ticket there.
Transition from student to prof, as a faculty member, it's much easier, the parking situation, because the university does make an effort to ensure that its faculty, that its staff have access to parking as far as is possible. Now, that being said, there was a bit of a transition period there when I was teaching on a per course basis, but I was also a graduate student. And as far as the university is concerned, in a situation like that, you're a student, so you still gotta take your chances. You're still fighting with all the other graduate students in that case to see, are you going to get a parking permit. The transition from being an undergraduate student to being a graduate student made, again, the parking process a little bit easier, because at least at the time, and I don't know exactly what the situation is these days, but in 2000, when I started my master's program here at Memorial, generally speaking, there were parking permits available for graduate students if you looked into it early enough. And being on campus pretty much 12 months of the year, even as an undergraduate, it was something that I could investigate very early on. And when permits became available, which, as I recall, was in the middle of May, I could pretty much be first in line then to get one of those graduate student designated permits. Where you wound up could sometimes be a bit touch and go. Sometimes the permits reserved for graduate students were pretty much the farthest parking spaces from the university, unless you wanted to pay the premium and park under the Earth Sciences building, which was the only kind of parking garage at the time. But it was at least easier than the undergraduate situation, where it's always been, in whatever form that they've used to allocate undergraduate parking spaces, it's always in some way, shape, or form been a bit of a lottery. Before I had a parking permit, because my first several years at Memorial I didn't, until I started working here in the summers, I'd often use the meters, and I'd try to arrange my schedule such that I'd be coming to the meters at a time when I was pretty sure there'd be some available, whether that was very early in the morning or later in the afternoon when people had already started leaving. Once I had a parking permit, the biggest issue then that I'd encounter would be that every now and then, and it still happens, sometimes the lot fills up. And trying to, and then you're more or less just left to your own recognizance to find a spot that seems reasonable to park in, that you hope campus enforcement won't penalize you for. So more often than not these days, if I show up on campus and there's no spaces available in my lot, I will pretty much drive around, or I'll sit in my car and wait for somebody to leave. And fortunately, the one nice thing is that my lot is big enough that people are coming and going fairly regularly throughout the day. Every now and then, I've gotten nabbed, especially as an undergraduate student, when my permit was much less conveniently located, so it was much more obvious when I was parking in a spot that I wasn't supposed to. I paid my fair share of dues on it as well. But fortunately not enough that I had to go out and get a part-time job to pay for. It often happens that people wind up in a lot that they don't have a permit for. My lot is a gated lot, but the bars on the gates often come down for whatever reason, and people slip through. I've even seen it where occasionally cars will, without a permit, will at the gate will come up right behind a car that does have a permit, and when the person who does have a permit swipes the gate and the arm lifts, they will burst through right after them and try to get in before the arm comes down. So yeah, it happens. I think parking must have some effect on student attendance, because inevitably, there are days when I show up and I know it's difficult for me to get a parking spot. With a gated lot, I should have a much better chance of getting a parking permit than a student who shows up at the same time. So I don't know that I can really say that it's a big problem, but I'd be shocked if it isn't occasionally a problem in every class that I teach every semester, at least on a handful of occasions. The funniest parking story I know of from my far too many years at university is probably the guy who, there was a guy who used to park in front of the library. And this was before the university center was built. So there was a lot more parking there at the time. And there was a guy who liked to park right near the door, but didn't have a parking permit. So had gotten a ticket at some point and decided, well, I'm going to show up. I'm going to try to get around this by taking the parking ticket that I got a week ago or a month ago or whatever. I'm going to tuck it under my windshield wiper, and they're going to think I've already been ticketed. And apparently this worked for a while. Apparently there were at least a few days when, he'd come out at 5 o'clock or whenever he was leaving, he'd pull the ticket out, he'd drive off, laughing at what he'd gotten away with. But eventually, the campus enforcement got wise to this, recognized that, hey, this car is always parking in this spot, they always seem to have a ticket. I don't remember writing a ticket for them this day or this week or possibly this month. And so the officer went and, I guess, looked at it and scrutinized and realized, this is from a month ago now. And so wrote a ticket, tucked it in under the other ticket. And then came back 2 hours later and saw the car was still there, with the now 2 tickets still there, and wrote him another ticket and tucked that in behind. Until finally, when the guy came out at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, thought he'd gotten away with it, went over, pulled what he thought was one ticket out from under his windshield wiper, and about a half a dozen more tickets flew out after him. And apparently he never parked there again. So I don't know how true that is, but that's a story that's made the rounds of the university for years and years and years, and I hope it's true, because it's pretty funny. I can't say I have any funny parking stories myself. Like I said, I've been fortunate that for the most part of the university, bar the odd ticket at night, I've been pretty fortunate with my parking. So I haven't had to do any wild and crazy stuff myself. Not so far, anyways. Knock wood. The best advice I can always give when it comes to parking is either be early or be strategic. The most likely times to get a parking space at MUN is either going to be early in the morning, although admittedly everyone seems to come a little bit earlier, so now early is becoming crazy early. Or look for times like lunch times are often good. I often find mid-morning, around 10:30 or so. So I think is a point in time where anybody who's come in, for example, just for an 8 a.m. or an 8 and a 9 a.m. class is probably heading off. You look for those kinds of times. Whereas if you're coming in at 9:30, you're probably completely out of luck, because everybody who's gotten in early has taken all those spots, and there's nobody likely to be leaving for a good hour or two at that point anyways. So I wish there was a better solution. I mean, the real truth is that the parking situation is not great. It's what we've got. We've got to live with it. So the best thing to do, I think, is find a lot and get a sense of the rhythm of when are people generally leaving that lot, when are they coming into that lot, and plan your parking accordingly. As a university, parking can't be that much of a priority. The facilities, the academic and teaching facilities have to be much more important, because we could knock down half the buildings at the university and have parking everywhere, but then what are you going to show up for?
I came back to Bonn in January 2013, and essentially I've never been driving to Bonn just because there's nowhere to park. Like I tried when I first came back in 2013, but you almost have to leave like an hour early for class in order to try to get a parking space. So instead, when I first came back, I was living on Cashin Avenue, and I used to drive to my dad's work, and I would leave my car there, and he would drive me to the bottom of Newtown Road, and I would walk to Bonn. Several of my dad's employees have driven me to work. One of the guys from William L. Chafin Sons has driven me to school. The singer of Masterless Men has driven me to school. Like, anybody who's in my dad's shop in the morning who's heading towards Mont, they'll give me a ride down to school. But, for instance, he's going to Florida in a few weeks. So I either have to walk, or last year when he went away, my friend Holly was living on Whiteaway Street, so I would park in her driveway and walk over from there. Rather than doing what I see some other people doing, say, parking on Whiteaway Street or Newtown Road in the daytime and risking getting a ticket, rather than trying to find a meter parking space or somewhere they're allowed to park on campus. You're allowed to park in the works for 2 hours, but generally that's how long my workout is, so I can't park there during classes. So I mean, there's no sense in coming down for 2 hours, parking at the gym, and then going home and getting a drive back to school. I had night classes last semester. Anytime that I had to park for a night class, I essentially got a ticket. And I would leave, at least a half hour before my class and try to find a meter parking space close to the building. And if that didn't fail, I would park in a parking lot that I knew that I wasn't allowed to and just hope that I didn't get a ticket. CBC building, after hours, like you can get a permit to park over there. Then there's the Aquarina, which you're not supposed to park in either, but these are just like other large parking lots that are around that people are utilizing because there's only X amount of meter parking spaces available. This year, for instance, the parking permit pool was not available, and they kept saying things like the Mun parking garage is not being utilized as much. To me, it's kind of a little bit of a cop-out, it's like we don't have these parking permit spaces to give away, but we do have paid parking that you can utilize every day and hope that you have enough change. Generally the exact change, so that you don't like put in $4 on a meter that you're only going to be using 2 hours. I've also seen people waiting for a good half hour outside like the Arts and Admin building, where there's a strip of parking meter spaces there, just waiting for someone to move so that they can get one of those meters. So like, how long have they been waiting there before their class time in order to get dibs on one of those? There was a while when I had someone else's car when they were gone on vacation and they had a parking permit, and that worked out very nicely, but technically you're not supposed to do that. There's definitely like an underground, I almost want to say culture of people who know certain parking tips and tricks, and it's not like it's very widespread because you don't want to tell too many people your tips and tricks, because then they're gone and it's common knowledge and everybody knows it, and it's no longer a trick anymore. In fall, I was doing a psych course, and it was a night course, and I had like $120 in tickets last semester. And it wasn't that they were on my car when I got out of class. It was I would get them in the mail like 2 weeks later. So I would get out of class thinking that I was in the clear. That's when I realized, okay, so after every class I'm going to get a ticket in the mail like 2 weeks later. I have seen an arm broken off of a parking lot. It looked like somebody drove through it. And I've seen people in the works parking lot. There's like a corner space. It's not a space, but I've seen them like backed up into snowbanks and everything up there, because especially if it's after 5 or 6 or whenever they leave the gate open, then if people are going to night classes, that's, I believe, who is the majority of people who park in the works parking lot after, 5 p.m. People going to night classes and stuff like that. So once the parking lot has filled up a bit, people are parked side along the dumpster, like maybe half an inch between you and the next car and stuff like that, like stuck in the corner into snowbanks. Wintertime is just the worst because you lose up to like between a third and a half of the parking lot and parking spaces, and so much of it is gone because of the snow. And equipment storage and all that stuff that goes along with winter, it just, anywhere between a third and half the parking lot and parking spaces can be gone at any given time.
Bring your car to the parking lot and ride around till you get a spot, 'cause we ain't doing nothing, no, we